Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another book review from the classic original 62 book series. And it's book number 58, Deep Trouble 2. Now, for those of you that don't know, Deep Trouble 2 is among the two original 62 books that I had yet to read, at least once in my lifetime. Now I'm just down to one after reading this for the first time ever, and that is Bad Hair Day. And I'll get to that book eventually at some point. But Deep Trouble 2. I avoided this book, and I mentioned this in my Deep Trouble review, that was not a fan of the original Deep Trouble book as a kid. I read it one time, and I just didn't like it. I never saw any value in rereading it. And I avoided this book like the plague as a kid. I would see it at my library, and I would be like, I'll get to that eventually. I'm just not a fan of it. And then when I phased out, I just never got around to reading it. And then when I got back to Goosebumps when I was around 13, I got back into it and read most of the books. Now granted, some of these books, and some I can remember off the top of my head that I've read as an adult for the first time, are like My Best Friend's Invisible, which I did for a former project. And I read How I Learned to Fly, which I reviewed on the channel already. So there were a handful of ones I never got around to reading. And finally getting to this book, I'll say after all these years, like the original Deep Trouble, I think this book is one of the overhated Goosebumps books. Commonly, I see people putting this book, like when they do like tier list rankings and like the D tier. I've seen some people put it in the F tier. But I think it's a little overhated. It's not perfect. It has its clear flaws to it. It's not really great by any means, but it's a solid one. And I'll get into more of what I want to say near the end of the video, but off the bat, if you haven't read Deep Trouble 2 before, I would try it out. The cover is not the most engaging thing ever, but hey, I mean, might be able to do something for you. So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So, the book starts off with Billy, the former protagonist from the original Deep Trouble. And it's a year later since that adventure, and Billy is playing imagination again, playing his adventurer alter ego and his, daydreams kind of thing. And he's talking to the reader about how last summer he made the discovery of a lifetime, finding mermaids, and how he's back again in the Caribbean with his uncle, Dr. Deep, and his sister Sheena on the Cassandra in the Caribbean again. And how he wants this summer to be just as much fun as it was last summer. If you can even call that fun, because there was a couple things that I want to consider fun out of that, but, go figure. Well, the daydream kind of ends when he thinks he sees a little tentacle monster and starts tickling it. And when it cuts to, he's tickling his sister Sheena. And Sheena's like, hey, can you cut it out? And Billy's like, come on, learn to take a joke. And Billy and Sheena, and this time around, have more of a playful nature with each other. And you see that, this year on the Cassandra, Alexander's not there, and it's just them and their uncle. So there's not a lot to do. So they go around playing pranks on each other rather than going, talking to Alexander or worrying about what to eat or being bored. They still go snorkeling and stuff, and that plays a role. But for the most part, they like to play tricks. And when we catch up with Dr. Deep, he's still doing research, and he's collecting some specimens that he thinks are kind of interesting in this area in the Caribbean they're in. They're no longer off the coast of Alondra, they're somewhere else. And he's been collecting that stuff. So they find this reef area, and Billy and Sheena decide to go snorkeling. And they're observing fish like before, and Billy shows that he's wiser about fire coral and all that. And then they have this interaction in the water where they think they see a really, really, really big fish, and they think they see a shark, right? So they head back to the boat. Sheena almost drowns. They have a close call. And they go to tell Dr. Deep about what they saw, and Dr. Deep is like, well, those things can't exist, right? But there is something peculiar I found that I want you guys to come look at in the lab. So they go in the lab and they see this big fish. And he's like, I've been looking in all these books and I can't figure out what species of fish this is. And Billy's helping them go through the specimen books, their biology books. And they come to the conclusion that there's this fish in the tank is a 4-foot long minnow, which is naturally an inch long. And Dr. Deep is like, this can't be, like, why is this happening, right? And throughout this, Billy and Sheena are playing pranks on each other, and Sheena gets Billy pretty good with a prank, and Billy wants to get her back, but has to think about a prank. And this time, Billy's brought a pet goldfish and some snails on board, and Dr. Deep reminds him to go feed his fish. But after examining the minnow, he hands him some plankton that he's collected from the area and said, hey, go feed them this and see if they like this. And Billy goes to his fish bowl and feeds the fish, and the fish are eating it up, and the snails are eating it up, and everything seems fine. Well, after that, they go back out. They're kind of bored again, and they go back out snorkeling, and then they think they see some giant fish in the water, right? And there's a close encounter with a giant jellyfish, right? And Sheena, it's pretty graphic and very scary. Like this stuff in this book with these giant fish and stuff get to me so bad. Monsters of the Deep stuff gets to me so badly. And Sheena gets pretty much sucked under by a giant jellyfish, and he goes to save her and pulls her out. And they finally manage to get on the boat. And when they get on the boat, they're like, we got to go find our uncle because something's definitely wrong here. And they see this giant snail, and it's presumably talking. And Billy kind of takes it from context clues, like, hey, wait a minute, that snail, is that Dr. Deep? And he realizes that Dr. Deep is underneath the snail, and the snail is probably one of his pet snails that he brought on board. And Dr. Deep's like, help me get this snail off me. And they get it off, and they keep hearing thudding and stuff. They got this giant snail, they got two giant jellyfishes waging war under the water, almost causing kids to drown. The boat's rocking back and forth. They hear these banging going on over in Billy's room, and Billy goes to investigate and sees that there are these two giant fish in his room that have basically turned his room upside down, and they're his goldfish. And they are about the size of a human, right? So you have giant sharks, giant jellyfish, giant snails, giant goldfish, and they have to rush to get these goldfish off the boat because they're just too big, and they manage to get the goldfish off the boat. And when they come to realize what's happened, they look around, everything's disheveled, broken, destroyed, and essentially there's white slime everywhere from these giant fish. And Dr. Deep is dumbfounded. He's never seen anything in science like this before, and he's just really appalled by what's going on. But then, all of a sudden, these three men have showed up and, like, parked themselves and got onto the boat, and we're like, hey, are you guys okay? I saw the boat was rocking, and there was some commotion, so we thought we had to come and help. And Dr. Deep's like, hey, no, we're all right. It's just me, my niece and nephew, caught a bad couple of waves. Well, the three gentlemen introduced themselves. The lead gentleman is named Dr. Ritter. And Dr. Ritter and his two assistants are also neighboring biologists and scientists in the area doing research and stuff. And they kind of question Dr. Deep, and they mention something to the effect like, have you seen any strange fish or wildlife around in the area? And Dr. Deep, of course, is trying to, hide the fact, like, he made this discovery. He wants to take credit for the discovery, kind of like last time when he found those mermaids. Well, technically Billy found the mermaids, but he was trying to take credit for it. Well, this time he was like, telling half-truths, not giving them the full story. And then Billy blurts out and said, yeah, we saw this stuff, like, yeah, it happened. And then Dr. Ritter was like, well, that's a shame that you saw this, because now I can't let you leave. And essentially, Dr. Ritter reveals that he's going to have to hold them all hostage and do something with them, because the reason why these animals are so big was from his doing. And Dr. Ritter goes into explaining that he's been doing research in the Caribbean, and all of these animals have been growing huge because he's been researching a growth hormone to put into plankton, which is a primary food source of fish. And if they eat this plankton, they can grow massive, and humans can eat more off these animals, and it can help in world hunger. So Dr. Deep's like, that sounds good and all, but don't you understand like the ethics of all this? Have you run tests on what it can do to humans? And he kind of mentioned something that there's like a problem with the formula, but he said that, in pure altruism, that this is going to revolutionize, food making, food industry in the world for humankind. And it kind of brings up the questions of unethical scientific testing, where, humans tend to test on animals without like an ethics code, or without proper supervision of a board or something that they normally have to go through, that they get their licensure. So it's obvious that Dr. Ritter's doing all of this under the thumb and under the noses of higher ups involved. So essentially, Dr. Ritter and his cronies, tie them all up and take them aboard their motorboat and take them back to their main boat that they're at. And they, drop them off and into a room and decide what to do with them next. So while in the room, Dr. Deep and Billy and Sheena are freaking out. Billy manages to get free and frees the others, but Dr. Ritter stops them and tells them to get back, onto the deck, because they're going to throw them off the boat. And Billy's eyeballing this raft, and this raft might be their ticket out of this boat. And Dr. Ritter and his cronies are about to, they have a spear gun in hand, and they're going to try to force them off the ship. And then all of a sudden, these giant seagulls come out of nowhere, mutated seagulls, presumably from this plankton, have come down and subdued Dr. Ritter and his cronies. And there's a scene where, Dr. Deep gets a spear gun fired at him. Yeah, that happens. Pretty violent. But they manage to avoid the spear gun, and the seagulls subdue the cronies enough to where they can throw the raft off the side of the boat. Billy, Sheena, and Dr. Deep all jump into the raft and start rowing off, and leave the others there, with those giant seagulls and not knowing what's going to become of them. Well, they have to row. They're far away from the Cassandra at this point, because the other ship is farther away. And now they're drifting in the ocean. They have no paddles. They have no food. They have no water. So they're bantering to each other about how awful it is to be stuck in the situation. And, they kind of get some laughs out of it because they understand the irony of the situation. And the raft is made of rubber, and it's very easy to fill up with water. And it starts raining, and they have to take off their shoes and scoop out the water to avoid, sinking the raft. And they go through a long, miserable, cold, rainy night. And then when the rain finally stops around the morning, they end up, nearby an uninhabited island. And they manage to get themselves onto the island. They survey the island. There's nobody around. It's just them. Not many trees, not much shade. Very bare essential, things that you can need to survive. But they have seafood nearby if they need it. They just need a fire to cook. And Billy goes off, finds some sticks. They build a fire pit. Dr. Deep's ready to, build a fire. Sheena goes, catches a small fish. And then Billy's like, well, you catched a tiny fish. Let's go catch a bigger fish. And you can kind of see the worry in Dr. Deep's eyes, like Billy's in his monologue, which is very rich, like the previous book, is saying that I think they know that they're going to be goners and pretty much die on this island together. So they're trying to make the best of it while they're still alive, right? So Billy's trying to help Sheena catch some fish, and then there's a whole altercation with a giant crab, and they have to climb up into a little tree. There's a close call with that, and then the crab goes away. And during this skirmish, they realized that their boat was gone. And now they have no way off this island, even if they wanted to muster up supplies to take with them. There's coconuts and stuff they could have loaded the boat, but it's gone. Well, a couple of dolphins had apparently found the raft and were playing with it like a toy and got caught up in the ropes of the raft and swam up to the island and kind of washed ashore. And the three of them were like, okay, this is our way off the island. This is where the story gets very plot conveniency. So, you know, they hop in the raft and they tug the rope to try to get the dolphins off, like out of the ropes. And the dolphins just go ahead and swim off like they're horses on chariots. And they swim them out into the ocean, and they're like, whoa, this is cool. Like, we're getting a ride now. We're going so much faster than before. And Billy's like, dolphins are smart. They should know where other humans are at, so maybe they'll take us to a boat or maybe an island to help us. And after a long while of riding, they end up in a fog. Through the fog, there's a ship, and at first they think it's the ship of Dr. Ritter, but then they see that it's the Cassandra, and the dolphins have magically brought them back to the Cassandra by miracle. And they're all praising it, and they carefully get out of the raft, get back on the boat. But no sooner than they get back on that they interact with Dr. Ritter, who's now on the Cassandra, and is telling them that they're going to be going right back off the boat, and he's now by himself. There's no cronies nearby, nothing, none of that. And Billy and them asked what happened to his cronies, and they said, well, Dr. Ritter is like, well, they're not here, but that's not important. I'm going to, I need to get rid of y'all because y'all can't keep my secret. Y'all going to try to steal it from me. And they keep urging with him throughout the story that they're not going to do this, but he won't listen. And he gets frustrated, and Dr. Deep, I guess, convinces him to go down to the lab where he has some of the plankton. He goes, hey, look, you say you have a kink in the problem. Explain to me what the problem is. Maybe I can help, right? And Dr. Ritter's like, okay, well, I'll entertain you, then still get rid of you. So they go to the lab, and there's, of course, plankton samples that Ritter's been, holding for research, and not Ritter, but Dr. Deep has been holding for research. And Ritter's like, see, you're already taking my plankton, you're already trying to take my stuff. And he goes into explanation even more. He's like, well, the reason why my cronies aren't here is because, when humans eat this plankton, instead of growing bigger, they become fish. What? They become fish. And his friends are out swimming with fish right now because they've turned to fish. And that's the kink they're trying to work out. And Dr. Deep's like, you're insane. This is crazy. You're not talking right. This can't be scientifically possible. Why don't you, we'll help you get the help you need. like you need a mental check, buddy. He's like, no, you don't believe me, do you? He's like, no, we're gonna turn you in. And, he gets kind of crazy and all that. And he's like, nobody's ever gonna turn me in. And then this is where this, the climax, I guess the climax ends, and Dr. Ritter does something with the plankton. And something happens, and everybody around is dumbfounded by what they just saw, and the story, goes from what happened there to the ending, where there's a big revelation, because something happens, there's something that Billy does specifically, that Dr. Ritter kind of forces him to do this action, dealing with the plankton. And you kind of see something not happen to Billy, but happen to somebody else. And the reason why it didn't happen to Billy, as Billy explains in the ending, is that he was doing this as preparation for, something that involved early on in the book. And once you hear that, it makes a lot more sense. And Sheena butts in and says, well, I did something similar. And she goes and does something with the plankton, and then the story ends there on a cliffhanger, not knowing what's going to become of her. And that's essentially Deep Trouble 2. Okay? I went really vague at the end because I don't really want to spoil the end. But yeah, Deep Trouble 2. I have some pretty good positives with this book. And let's start off with the obvious ones. Like the original Deep Trouble, Billy's monologue is really good. I mean, he has some wit, he has some sass to him, He's pretty honest with the reader. He has his his fearful moments, but he's also very brave and very forthright, and he's a really good protagonist. Honestly, after reading this book, Billy's really cemented as probably one of the all-time best Goosebumps protagonists. I mean, if it wasn't for him being so good, I think some of these books might just be more okay, not actually good. But I think Billy's an integral key to what makes this book pop. He's just a really great protagonist with a really rich monologue. Sheena, debatably, I think has more, action to her character in this book, even though they're kind of more dumbed down to pranking and stuff. But I feel like I got a little more Sheena snark because, she's kind of a know-it-all in the first Deep Trouble, and here she's actually using it against Billy in some ways, and I feel like I got a lot more of her personality. Dr. Deep, he's still the same character. He's still fun. These are like, reacquainting yourself with old friends almost. And I got I wouldn't say they're old friends to me, but I've really got a sense that these characters really work together. The dynamics of these characters just really pop and stand out. And probably will whenever I think back on Goosebumps characters. These three characters are great. The atmosphere, the Caribbean atmosphere, is an awesome setting for a Goosebumps story. I mean, the ocean itself, like I've said before, I have thalassophobia, and I have a fear of, deep water, the abyss, sea monsters and stuff. This stuff really gets to me. And there's a lot more scary scenes in this book compared to the original. The original was just more like tentacle monster stuff, but here you got like giant jellyfish sucking in Sheena, and Billy having to go rescue her. That's really, really frightening. Giant sharks, giant crabs. It was more of a creature feature focus, and I can really appreciate that. I've heard some people in the past say that they think that this book should have went more adventurous and done more, I don't know, exploring, which the first book didn't even do. I guess they wanted a kind of a go back to basics with the first book, but actually go exploring this time instead of going off on a tangent with mermaids. Here, they kind of just went full on creature feature with it, and I really enjoyed it. The closest thing to this I can think of is maybe something like Awesome Ants, which is very similar. And like if you wanted to make like a Goosebumps lore connection to Awesome Ants and Deep Trouble, I think you could. I mean, there's a argument that maybe some of this stuff, one of these growth hormones that were put into the plankton, could have been the same that was put into the ant food. But yeah, it's very reminiscent to Awesome Ants, and I quite like that story. So yeah, this was fun. Creature feature at its finest in Goosebumps. And yeah, the concept, like I really liked the going back to a moral that Deep Trouble 1 had. This one has a different moral. The first book was talking about the morality of encaging animals. Again, sentient animals. They have feelings, and putting animals on exhibit, is it ethical, right? Making you question that. This book is talking about animal testing and even the ethics of humans and like food consumption and stuff, and it has that layer to it that's kind of cool. I like that stuff is in there. It's more environmentally conscious than the first book. It's talking more about the environment, the food chain, stuff like that. So this stuff can get out of hand pretty quick. So it's pretty threatening stuff. And I was really engaged and hooked on the story. Now, let's get into the negatives, though. The big blatant negative I noticed in the book is its pacing. Very akin to some books like Egg Monsters from Mars, or some other books in the past that kind of mirror this, maybe like Fifth Grade Zombies. The pacing is just very rushed. A lot happens all at once. It's a very crisp-paced book. It hits the ground running, and sometimes that's a good thing in Goosebumps, but sometimes it isn't when the pace doesn't allow itself to breathe organically. Like when Dr. Ritter comes into the story, it feels sudden. Like all of a sudden, this stuff starts happening. There's no real build-up to any like major turning points in the plot. It just keeps barreling over that stuff and just keeps rolling and rolling and rolling. And I feel like the book doesn't take time to breathe. The only time it does is when they crash land on the island, but then it gets kind of stale until the dolphins come, which leads into my second negative with it. The book, near the end, gets super plot conveniency. And I acknowledge that Goosebumps has some plot convenience in the stories, y'all. But when it's obvious like that, when dolphins are entangled into the raft with ropes, and then they hop in it, and then the dolphins take off like a horses and chariots to the Cassandra itself, like a straight beeline to that, that's straight up plot convenience, y'all. There's no way that happened as quickly as it did. I mean, if it is, that's just dumb luck, but that stuff is just ridiculous. Like, okay, Stein is like, okay, we're getting to this point where I don't know where else to go, so I'm just going to throw this crap in here, get them back on the boat, and wrap this book up. Very plot conveniency-ish. And going into probably the biggest drawback to me for this book, right, is a twofer. You got the villains themselves and the twist at the end involving what this plankton stuff does to humans. First off, the villains. Dr. Ritter and his cronies feel like over-the-top characters. If you've ever seen the Three Ninja movies, you know how buffoonish those villains can be. That's how Dr. Ritter and his cronies come off in the book. I was really thrown off by them, and Dr. Ritter really isn't all that menacing and threatening. I mean, especially in the end when he's outnumbered 3-1. I mean, you can just take this guy out. I mean, the fact that they were subduing to his threats, it just came off kind of questionable. And that leads to the final negative I have, which is the twist involving the plankton and humans. Now, the plankton does something to humans. And the plankton to every other species turns them big. But when it's ingested by humans, it does something else. That, to me, is a very lackluster addition to add for humans. And also, like, why specifically humans? We never get really any deeper backstory to the plankton formula other than that it's a growth hormone altering plankton. We don't know anything about, human testing before this or anything. And why specifically humans? Like, what about this growth hormone does this to humans specifically? It's never explained. And it just comes off kind of random and kind of dumb. And the ending, when you see what happens with this stuff, it is pretty silly and dumb. But other than that, I think this book is solid, right? It's just a solid one. Probably more average. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, I was thinking in my head, this book is probably just as good as something like 5th Grade Zombies, right? It's very flawed. It has its clear flaws, but it's clear fun moments and scary moments. It's very close to something like Egg Monsters from Mars as well, but I'd probably put it just a little bit below that. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, it was going to get between a 3.5 to a 3.9, and I decided to give it a flat in the middle 3.7 out of 5, which is just a flat C. Yeah, pretty average / good book. It's overhated. I can see maybe why you don't like the villains or think some parts of the story is dumb, because it is. But I think I got a lot out of it personally. I was scared about the ocean and the fish, and that stuff got to me. And yeah, I'd recommend this one. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Deep Trouble 2. Let me know down in the comment section down below. Do you love this book? Do you hate this book? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.